Let's Connect. The Let's Connect series happens, what, weekly? Is it? Or bi-weekly? That it's a group of people, no charge, just join up, and they talk about a topic of that particular week. So it's a different topic every time, and you're welcome to join with it. She's great at leading these discussions, and people get to know each other well in this context. It is a discussion-based program. Okay, on to our speaker for the day. Tom Boyer has a 35-year history with Hewlett Packard before moving to Humboldt County about 10 years ago. His background is in high tech. However, when he moved to Cal Poly to Humboldt County, he was granted a BA in Studio Arts from Cal Poly Humboldt and has been having a very good time with it. He's here today to talk to us, and we're looking forward to this discussion. It's all yours, Tom.
Okay. So Jane, the Zoom meeting is right in front of my presentation. You limited that last time we talked a few minutes ago.
Now you can bring up share screen again.
Okay.
Hit share screen.
Yes, I see. Hold on.
There you go.
All right, cool.
We got it.
Okay, my name is Tom Boyer. Like Jane said, I'm a resident now of Humboldt County. I lived in the Bay Area for a long time. My background is mostly technical. I was hired as a technician at HP. What I want to talk about today is how technology is an interrupter to the way we live. In other words, there are oftentimes unintended consequences to technology, and I want to stress that. I'm going to talk about fabric technology, and particularly weaving in the 18th century. I'm going to talk about Joseph Jacquard and his new loom, Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace, Herman Hollerith and the census. I'm talking about calculating and computing in the first half of this last century, the 20th century. I'm going to specifically talk about Grace Hopper, Katherine Johnson, and Margaret Hamilton. And then finally, my experience of the unexpected, the unintended consequences of the new technology. Often we think of technology as a new way of doing things, but technology more often than not leads to changes in the structure of technology, in the structure of society. I'm sorry. For example, excuse me, doesn't seem to be. Printing not only led to newspapers and such, but to the democratization of knowledge. In other words, everybody now had an opinion and they could share it, as opposed to knowledge only coming from the Pope or from the king. And then democratic knowledge, of course, went to Twitter and to Facebook and Instagram and such. Also, horseless carriages, pretty innocuous invention, seems like, led to automobiles and then led to interstates and smog. By the way, Dwight Eisenhower was the first person to think about interstates because he liked them in Germany, like the Autobahns in Germany, and he thought it was a way of getting all the small towns in the country, like where he grew up in Denison, Texas, to become integrated. In fact, what happened is that all those small towns were bypassed by the interstates. Okay, this topical change in fabric technology led to a significant social change. That is the role of women in the workforce. Okay, this is a typical loom for a manual person that does looming or does weaving as a craft. You can see my cursor. That space right there is called a shed, and the weaver will pass a shuttle back and forth, and then pass that beating bar to tighten up the weave, and then bring up the what's called the warp threads to the top, and the other ones that were on the top, on the bottom, and then pass his shuttle back and forth. And that's a simple way of doing all weaving. By the way, anytime that you want to ask a question, don't hesitate to either raise your hand as a participant, and then I'll stop at particular spots to make sure that everybody has a chance. Okay, a typical simple weave is a tartan. A tartan is made first by making the warp threads. If you're making a scarf, the warp threads are how long the scarf is, and the weft threads are how wide the scarf is. You'll notice that the warp threads are green, and then red and red. And the same pattern is on top, on the horizontal, as it is on the side. Tartans have been around for about 3,000 years. And the way the tartans are made specifically to have this mixed color and mixed green and red colors are by picking up the warp threads at certain particular points of time. Brocades are woven by picking up warp threads in very complex patterns. Mostly brocades are used for, these brocades are used for the church, for royalty, and for people that have more than enough money that they know what to spend on. Like I said, brocades are used by manipulating the warp threads as opposed to plain weaving, which manipulates the weft threads. As you can understand, for intricate patterns, this becomes really complex. Any questions? Good. Brocades before Jacquard. Okay. Two workers, the master weaver and the drawboy. The drawboy was usually a teenager. The weaver, the master weaver, would sit here on the corner and sometimes raise petals and down to raise the specific warp threads. And the drawboy was used to actually enhance the warp threads for particular colors. In other words, warp threads could be many colors and sometimes silver and sometimes gold. In a full day, 2 square inches of weave was made. That's about the size of a Band-Aid. Of course, it was prone to errors in work. If you ever worked with a teenager, you understand this. And it was dangerous since these kids had to lift a whole bunch of stuff, their body weight and weaving threads at a time, in a process which left many of them crippled over the years. Let's go on to Joseph Jacquard. His father was a weaver in Lyon, France, which was a center of fabrics in France in the 1700s. Jacquard didn't want to get into his father's business, so he went off to Paris, and he came across a couple of people that were already working on using punch holes to manipulate a weaving process. Jacquard, however, was the one that patented the process. And he used a chain of punch cards to create a sequence. This is a model of his machine that's in the Science Museum in Paris. You see the punch cards there. You can see the warp threads there, and the shed where the weaver would still have to pass threads through there. The cards told the loom which threads to raise at a specific time to produce the weave, and each card corresponded to a row of the fabric's design. Okay. Any questions? Good.
I actually have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So all the design was in the punching of the cards.
Exactly. And I have some videos at the end that shows how a designer of the fabric would actually lay out the design on square grids, and that would turn over to the puncher, the guy who was actually punching the cards, and he would actually punch those as to what the program was going to be for that particular pattern. A very manual process that's been overtaken by computers, of course.
How long did that last? That technology, the punch card
Yeah,
technology.
this punch. There are still looms in Paris that are using these original punch cards, so it's still around.
That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, well, some people hesitate to give up technology they know about. And I'm sure that, by the way, I'm sure that if you're a craft shop, you know, with a specialized, you're only doing a certain number of fabrics for a special customer, that this technology would work just fine. This is a tapestry of Jacquard himself. This is see, I can't, medium, I guess, would be the best thing to say. It's about a foot and a half tall and a foot wide. It was the original painting was digitized and then run through his loom to make the drawing himself.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly. Charles Babbage, math prodigy in the 19th century. He tinkered with automatons. Automatons are robots like you would see on a department store at Christmas time. But automatons were pretty popular in 18th century France. And they had very complex robots, very complex automatons that did drawings and that played pianos and wrote notes. And as a matter of fact, he had one of those automatons in his laboratory. He recognized Jacquards as a process to add to his computing engine, his calculating engines. He had a contract with the Navy, with the government, to produce a difference engine that would calculate basically logarithmic tables that the Navy would use for their navigation. This is a model in Mountain View of his original design that was never completed, by the way. In 1832, he conceived the idea of a better machine that could perform not just one mathematical task, but any kind of a calculation. It's the analytical engine. This first one was the difference engine. This was the analytical engine. It was intended as a general symbol manipulator and had some characteristics. Arithmetic logic unit, basic flow control, and an integrated memory, and is considered the first general purpose computer. Concept. Again, he never completed it. IBM completed one based on his initial drawings, and this is in an IBM museum in upstate New York. By the way, engine in the 19th century was a term that was used for anything that was mechanical. Ada Lovelace, born in the early 19th century, about 1815, I think. Her father was Lord Byron. We could talk about Lord Byron and his family life, but that's another story. That marriage only lasted for a year or so. She was raised by her mother, who insisted that she learn mathematics, which was very unusual at the time. People thought that was a waste of time. By the way, Abraham Lincoln's father thought it was useless for him to learn how to read. She collaborated with Babbage. People that follow Babbage as a historian, I think that Babbage collaborated with her or vice versa, although they really did share a lot of knowledge. Babbage put on a presentation of how the machine worked, and this Italian scientist wrote it up, and she added extra chapters to that write-up which became the foundation for software. This Ada is considered the first programmer. In the 1980s, the Defense Department had all kinds of computers and languages coming into them, and so they wanted to have a standard language for all programs that were going to be run and bought by the Defense Department, and they called that language Ada, basically after her. This is the title page of Ada's translation. Like I said, there was about, I think, 12 or so chapters from by Benebra, and she added another 12 of them. Her contributions are a symbolic logic for items other than math. Babbage only wanted to do numbers, but she said you could do colors, you could do animals, you could do people. She helped design the concept of subroutines and a library of commonly used subroutines. Calls of conditional branching, if then else. Recursive loops, which means that the program that you're running can call itself. Ada, you can read this by yourself, but I'll read it for you. We may say that most aptly that the analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the Jacquard Loom weaves flowers and leaves. Okay, I'm going to stop there with Ada and Charles Babbage and Jacquard. Is there any questions? None.
It's
Okay.
fascinating.
How does that relate to the algorithms we talked about earlier?
Okay. So I talked about the algorithms is a conditional branching. If then else is a particular task that's used in algorithms. In subroutines, this is if we were to amplify on algorithms, these are the sums of things we were talking about. Okay.
Can you give an example of an algorithm or of one of these conditional branches? I mean, where it's used.
I'm going to make a run to the bathroom, right? There's a door that says men and a door that says women. I choose the one that says men. If I don't choose the one that says choose men, I may have to use the one that says women. If then else is the issue. It's the situation. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's very simple. Hermann Hollerith. Hermann Hollerith was in Germany. He worked for the Census Department in the 1880s. In 1880, the census took 8 years to count. He developed a process that used punch cards and electrically actuated accumulators to increment the count. So not only did he use the punch cards, but because electromagnetics relays were invented, he put those two together and actually had a machine that would count the cards, count the information on the cards. The invention in 1990 count was done in 6 years based on his new machine. He formed his own company, which later became the foundation of IBM. This is a typical Hollerith machine. It's a card sorter at the top, and all the wires at the bottom were how he programmed that machine. These machines were still in use in the 1960s and 70s for doing business processes. And I'm sure there's probably still people that are still using them. They were basically accounting machines. They really weren't computers as we know them. Key punch is a key process for inputting data into these machines. Now we're going to start talking about how this changes. This is a typical IBM card. It's the code that he used is now called the Hollerith code. The size of the card, by the way, is the size of what the dollar bills were at the time. And he made those cards that size because there was already machines around that could manipulate dollar bills that he could go ahead and use for manipulating the cards. Okay, part 2. We'll discuss new technology and how they generate a significant difference in business practices. What we're going to talk about is how women's roles have changed. Okay, before we start there, any more questions? Cool. Let's see, we got a chat here. Let's chat. Oh, okay, good. Okay, early key punch operator, 1920s. Early machine operators running the Hewlett machines. This is probably the 1920s, 1930s, maybe. This is probably 1950s, 1960s, or maybe 1940s. I operated these kinds of machines when I was first at HP. You will see this kind of room probably into the 1980s. The key punch operators would take original documents such as sales orders or inventory records and punch cards, make punch cards based on the information on those cards. Also, programmers would write up their programs and give them to the operators so that they could input those computers into their machines with the punch cards. Alan Turing was a mathematician in the 30s in England. He wrote up what a Turing machine was, what a computer was. He's considered the founder for theories about computing and computers. Turing studied Ada Lovelace. Ada thought that computers would never take the place of human intelligence, and Turing was never sure. Grace Hopper. In the 1930s, Grace trained as a mathematician. Probably not as unusual as it was in the 19th century, but still, you didn't find too many mathematicians that were women then. During World War II, she worked on tactics with the War Department and using digital computers, which were being developed for the War Department at the time. She was a member of a team after the war that designed the first practical business computer language, COBOL. Now, COBOL is probably around and is still being used in a lot of applications because it's hard to change. She stayed in the Navy and became an admiral. And she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Who has heard of Grace Hopper? Many people?
I've heard the name.
Okay, good. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, most all the engineers in NASA programs have been men. Okay, and this is like a typical 50s or 60s at HP, where all the men were wearing white shirts and ties. And if the women wanted to smoke a cigarette, they had to go to the restroom. Engineers and others did not consider computers an engineering function. In other words, the engineers considered the computers the women that were actually doing the calculations. Katherine Johnson was the woman that's portrayed in the movie. She was a math prodigy like Babbage. She worked as a computer, manually calculating trajectories on early astronaut flights, Gemini and Apollo and such. The Computational Research Facility in Virginia is named after her now. She was also awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Margaret Hamilton. Apollo program in the 60s was the first to use computers for flight control. Very simple computers, probably no more than 4 bits. Margaret led a team of engineers to write software for these new computers. Margaret and her team promoted software engineering as an engineering discipline. And she got a lot of pushback from astrophysical engineers, from mechanical engineers, and from electrical engineers who thought that writing software was no more important than doing the calculations that were done manually before. She also was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Okay, let's review what we've talked about so far. We've talked about Jacquard Loom led to unexpected changes in society. Now, I didn't talk about some of the other changes that those looms came about because they made significant changes in labor relations. As a matter of fact, when those looms became popular and laborers were put out of business because of that, some of the people would throw shoes into the looms. And a French word for loom, for shoes, is sabot, S-A-B-O-T, which was where our word for sabotage comes from. Analytical engines in Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace. The British, I think, made a mistake by not pursuing that, but that's the story of how governments work. Hewlett and IBM, which were considered computers in the early 20th century, but really not. Computers became digital in the 1930s and 40s, especially with World War II. Software was finally recognized as an engineering function, especially where there were no entrenched male role models. In other words, women could become engineers if they did software because they didn't have to put up with a male bias against it. A new role for women entering engineering. Now, I started at HP in the 60s when HP made their first computer. There were no women in management. Like I said before, if a woman wanted to smoke a cigarette, she had to go to the restroom. In 1980, I joined a division that made chemical analysis equipment. This is a mass spectrometer. A mass spectrometer will spit out more information in a minute than a chemist can analyze in a year. At that time, it was considered that maybe we should put computers and the analytical instruments together. But we had to hire a new breed of engineers. So the HP began to hire software engineers. Many of these were women, because at that time, by that time, Stanford and Berkeley and even Cal State Chico had engineering departments that were producing graduate engineers that were women. And many of those showed up at HP. More importantly, software became an entry point that led to women being promoted into engineering management. HP, like a lot of other companies, like to hire from within. HP, like most engineering companies, like to promote engineers into management. So a typical software engineer might work on a project for 2 or 3 years and then become a project lead, and then become a department lead, and then become a group lead, and then become into higher management, so that over 10 or 20 or 30 years, they could work themselves up into higher management. As a matter of fact, there were 7 levels of management between me and the chairman of the board when I retired from HP. Every one of them was a woman. In fact, the chairman of the board was a woman as well, Carly Fiorina. Now you notice that she's wearing a brocade fabric. I thought that was clever. Now, before I go on to any extras, you have any questions? I'm open. Hello?
Janina, go ahead, unmute.
I am unmuted. This is more of a reference rather than a question, but I found it amusing. When I graduated from Humboldt in '73, I went down to the Central Valley and worked for Kings County, in a basement that had hot water pipes running through it, just like those women typing up those IBM cards. And I did my job for a week and then gave a 2 to 3 weeks notice that turned into several months until they could replace me, because it was so darn hot down there. And besides punching numbers, I had to babysit that machine to make sure none of the cards flipped out, and they flipped out quite often. So that was one thing, and that was in Kings County. And alternatively, my husband at the time was a lab technologist working in chemical tubes, the tubes and the liters and all that kind of stuff. And in his time, in his career, it changed to that analysis machine that did his work so much faster, but luckily he kept his job. So he just transitioned into the computer stuff. But I think it's just really funny. I'm only 77. And in that short amount of time, look at the big changes. So anyway, that's just what I was thinking.
And to add to that, in the 1970s, I was working at the Learning Research and Development Center. And the issue was how to get a computer that would fit into we were developing computer assisted instruction up there. And the issue at the time was how to develop a computer that would be small enough to fit in a van outside a school so they could teach with this. And now, of course, you have your smartphones. So that's enormous change over 55 years. And when I started learning Fortran. I had punch cards, and you had to, God knows you didn't want to drop your punch cards. You would just die. And you take your punch cards and it spit out the program. You had to go through the program and find where it was screwing up and not looping properly or whatever you'd done to mess it up, and then feed it back through again. It was a pain in the royal. And I'll never forget those days. I'm glad we're way past them.
I took a tour of the UC Irvine campus, and the tour guide pointed out the computer building, and it was about a 4 or 5 story building. And he says, those wide doors on the side of the building are where they were going to put the computers in and out when they, did the processes. By the way, this campus was built in the 1970s. He says the other thing that's important about that building is that there were no women's restrooms in that building at all.
Yeah, well, they also had the best air conditioning around, because they were these great big machines. They had tapes, and they're in there having to be kept cool. So if you wanted to make sure you were, they didn't want people in there, obviously, but it took up a huge room with huge computers, all based on, I think, tapes at the time. And nobody went there unless you were part of that system. But
that's right.
You sent in your cards, and they processed it, spit it out, and gave it back to you in the form of your program.
My wife
wasn't a great time.
My wife tells me that the computer where the campus that was running her programs was 20 or 30 miles away, and so she would type up her cards and then send them by some transit, and they would run them. And then if there was errors, the next day they would send those back. And so she would correct them and then send them back again, back and forth. So it might take, weeks to get a simple program written if you weren't very careful.
And probably the most exciting thing that ended up, if you were a writer, and when I was working at the Urban Institute and going to law school, they had Videx, and Videx were the original, they were a form of computer. You could type it in and correct it, which, you didn't have to use. I actually found a piece of carbon paper the other day. I was going through old files, and it's like, oh my God, I remember learning to type and having to have, type hard enough on your manual typewriter to go through several layers of carbon paper in order to have copies, and a miserable situation if you ever made a mistake.
Oh, yes.
Like, oh God. Anyway, we've come a long way and life is so simple now, and yet it gets increasingly complex as our machines and our computers get more complicated. And we have these smartphones and all these programs. And now we have chat box and oh my goodness.
Tom, I will just, this is Judith, and I'll interject. Going back to your machinery for textiles, I was a textile designer in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. We did many types of textiles, but many knit fabrics, we call them knit fabrics,
Of course.
which were done on machinery in the South, always in the South, with cones of cotton on top of these. You would call it a weaving mill. It was a knitting machine, hand jacked by hand. I designed those programs with graph paper, actually X's on graph paper to indicate where the colors were. And within probably 7 years of that time, those were all machinery operated instead of people hand jacking and coning the machinery. So it was a transition that happened very quickly in the South. So yeah, just an interesting time change for me in textile design.
So the other thing that happened about HP at the same time was that HP became a design house. We had big manufacturing plants in Idaho and in California and in Colorado. And those kind of disappeared because all that manufacturing went overseas. And so you'd still have engineers that would have the design functions here in the States, but all the manufacturing was done in China or in Vietnam or Malaysia. And that was a big, huge change. That was a big, huge social change as well. And
it's still that way, isn't it?
yes, it's still that way. I think some of it's coming back though, because it's strategically, you're kind of making suicide decisions if you have everything that's important to you being made by somebody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Protective equipment is a good example.
Right.
You have a question from Richard. What is your opinion on AI? Should we be concerned?
Yeah, of course we should be concerned. We should be concerned. We should have been concerned with the internet. We should be concerned. We should, but the British should have been concerned with Jacquard and the other manufacturers that were doing all kinds of new things with the fabric technology. AI is a particular concern because it takes the human completely out of it can take the human completely out of the equation. I think we're seeing basically now is kind of primitive AI, and as AI gets smarter, it may start running its own machines, to do things that it wants to do. So, and I'm not sure how to answer that because our political process is kind of stuck in the mud about how to address this. There's a paper written by Bill Kay, talks about in 20 or 30 years ago. I can't remember the name of the paper, and I'll attach it. If I find it, I'll attach it to the slide set when I pass it on to the OLLI group. And he talks about how not just AI, but all kinds of things, are important to get a handle on AI. There was an article in the New York Times several months ago talking about how Ford, no, excuse me, GM, wanted to develop a fuel that would make the engines work better. And so they set up a division that made ethyl for gasoline, right? And ethyl is full of lead. And so now they're trying to get rid of the lead. The same engineer that designed the ethyl for gasoline also designed Freon. And Freon punches holes in the atmosphere. And so we have to get rid of that now. So there's all kinds of consequences, significant consequences on how technology is invented. And we either don't have the foresight to do something about it, or we don't have the will to do something about it.
Part of the problem is to get the legislation passed they have to compromise and grandfather in a lot of these industries. And this happened with the Toxic Substance Act,
Yeah,
where they grandfathered almost everything that was being produced at the time, and only new chemicals had to. But they still have the policy that rather than the person with the new chemical having to prove it's innocuous, it works the other way around. You have to prove that the chemical is making creating problems. Or
yes,
is dangerous before you can get rid of it, and it takes years.
yes. Yeah, there's lots of embedded politics in that, I guess. Let me show you some of my extras on this because I think you'll appreciate those. Hold on. So for people that want to learn more about this, these are two books that I would highly recommend. Connections by James Burke. He's still around. He did a presentation in the 70s on BBC about how technology has moved from generation to generation and makes all kinds of social changes. And then Walter Isaacson is unique in writing about technologists in particular. And this book is one that I've borrowed from a lot.
And he just finished one on Elon Musk, didn't he?
Yes, he did have one, Elon Musk. Yeah, Elon Musk. By the way, one of the things that if you read these things, you'll find out that those inventors that are sometimes attributed to inventing things on their own are really standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, Edison basically stole the idea of an electric light bulb. Leonardo da Vinci went around and documented things that were invented, not necessarily invented those things himself. So on and on and on. Chuck Close is an artist that has basically spent his career in digitizing his face. And this is a tapestry that he's done. I'm not sure when it was done, but it's 2013. But this tapestry is about 7 feet tall. And it's made by a specialized Jacquard machine that was modified just for his project. Hidden Figures, that's the movie that was taken from. I highly recommend you read that, you watch that movie. Another movie is Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch about talking about Alan Turing and how the English kind of screwed him up. The graphics on the brocades I got off of Etsy, and Etsy had this donor from Ukraine where they are doing most of these brocades, which I thought was kind of interesting. When I looked to see about Turing, I came across this other digital machine, and I don't know much about that, so I didn't really include it in my presentation because it didn't follow my theme. But I would go and look and see this a little bit more to find out. I never even heard about this before. And then at the end of this presentation, there's a bunch of YouTube videos that show you some of the things that more closely explain what the Jacquard Loom does and what the weaving processes are. And then all my references. Anything else?
I think this concept of taking a subject like technology and tracing it back and how it affects society is really interesting. And we could do that with any number of issues, I think, or institutions. I think it's really neat that you've done this and pulled it together. And it would be a good source for discussion on what else is happening in our world that is getting out of our control, like AI, like the environment, climate change. There's so many areas that information overload.
Yes.
How do you handle it?
Right. Just let our grandchildren take care of it.
Yeah, well, that's what we end up delegating it to the next generation. They're looking around at us and say, "You screwed this up. Why don't you have solutions? Why do you leave it up to us to fix the mess you made, right?"
Right.
So,
And sometimes we would think we were doing the right thing, though.
well, at the time, we certainly think we're doing the right thing because we think technology is going to fix everything,
Mhm.
but that's questionable. There are options we may not want. There are buttons we may not want to press.
Exactly.
Read about a new, apparently we have a new nuclear bomb or technology that will wipe out everything even worse than whatever, what than we already have. So it's not encouraging. Anybody have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. What did you think?
I think this is an excellent presentation and I thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. I think we need to delve farther into the
Yeah.
brain. It's just great.
The scary process. They're learning a whole lot of things we may or may not want to know. But the whole conversation of what we're learning about the brain and its capacities compared to what computers do. You know, we're scrambling to keep up with the computers, let alone scrambling to try to figure out what's going on in our brains, let alone what's going on in the bottom of the ocean. So, I mean,
Very true.
there's a wonderful wealth of information and knowledge out there which we get to explore on OLLI, and I hope you all will take advantage of the wonderful courses we have and continue to join up with our OLLI Brown Bag Lunch program. And I want to thank Tom again and note that next Monday, James Moore will be presenting Who Needs Physical Therapy? It's not well defined in the public mind. We will show the various aspects of physical therapy and what injuries physical therapy is good for treating. We'll illustrate the various types of treatment in physical therapy, including hands-on body work, exercise and activities, preventive measures, and modalities to control pain. I've gone to him and I recommended he do this because he's a superb diagnostician, and he's right here in Arcata. And my experience is, instead of going for a medical fix of the pain or going for surgery or whatever, I say, send me to James, because he'll probably figure out what the heck I'm doing that's causing this problem, whether it's my posture or how I'm getting in and out of chairs or how long I'm sitting or how I'm sleeping, that will tell me and give me exercises to fix it and things not to do as well as things to do. So you might find this interesting, because having to take pills and get surgeries isn't any fun. Maybe you can avoid a back surgery. Anyway, thanks again, Tom. Thanks for you all for
I do
coming.
have one thing that on the introduction, you
Pardon
said, yeah, on the introduction to the class,
Uh-huh.
it was pointed out by Marina that you had to sign up, 2 or 3 days before taking a class.
That's for classes.
That's for classes, because it wasn't clear that brown bag lunches and classes were different. to
Oh,
those-
they're totally different.
Yeah, to those uninitiated, right?
Yeah, you have to pay for the classes. And brown bag lunch programs are free, and they're free to the public. But if you only get an invitation to it, if you either are a member, or if you go to the website humboldt.edu/olli/brown bag, or /brown bag, and you can sign up there. So you don't have to be a member. But if you're a member, then you get an invitation prior, not only the week before, typically the Wednesday or Thursday before the talk, and then that morning of the talk. We got them this morning, I think about 9:15. So you do get a reminder, and we hope you'll come to future ones. And feel free to give us suggestions, by the way, of topics you'd be interested in learning about. You can email me. You can send them to humboldt.edu/olli. No, I'm sorry. The email is olli@humboldt.edu. That's the email address. You can send it, or to janepwoodward@aol.com. I have one of the oldie ways of doing email. AOL is still around, alive and well, but it's been around.
Jane, this, I think this program today illustrates the diversity between your next program and today in what you cover, what we cover at OLLI. So we're not just on one vector, we're into the whole span. I love that. Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Tom.
Welcome.
Yeah, we appreciate you all coming. If you have any suggestions or questions, you're welcome to send them to OLLI or to me. And you can even put in a proposal if you want to do a program yourself and give a talk. Rowetta, you know a whole bunch of stuff that might be very interesting to discuss on one of these presentations.
I'll pass on my slide set to Jane also, and she can distribute it as people want to see it. And I think that the presentation's been taped as well.
So thank you all, and we will see you hopefully next week.
Sorry, I was late getting here. I had a doctor appointment.
Okay, take care. Marina, you can shut us down.